All right, fact check this podcast. And today I expect that I am coming through with a monumental echo because the the internet at our new place is not currently functional. Don't know why that is. So I'm at the old place. Dual purposes, both because I have stuff that I need to pick up from here, and also because I was going to be doing the stream today, and internet is kind of a necessity for doing a stream. Uh, so I am going to be joined by Stephanie Edmonds here shortly, but while we wait for her, let's kind of do a little recap of what's been going on in the news over the past 48 hours or so since my Monday original stream plan fell through, and then I've been experiencing some massive technical difficulties with my computer, and then today I'm running off of my laptop, which is less than ideal. Oh, Stephanie's here, so we will fire it up. The fact check this podcast. I apologize for any echo. I am in my old house, which is incredibly vacant. There's nothing in here to really catch any of the echoes, so it is what it is. Internet at my new house went out today, so I'm improving.
All right. That's, my one house to another house. No big deal.
So introduce yourself and tell us a little bit on, and then we'll kind of jump into stuff that I had mentioned I was wanting to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So, Stephanie Edmonds, I am a kind of maybe former, might still be a New York City teacher. I'm not exactly sure what my status is at this moment. I'm pretty sure I'm still a New York City teacher on unpaid leave, and I am going to be terminated any day now. Though I keep saying that. Yeah, so I live out here just outside of New York City, actually in Connecticut, but right outside the city. And I was teaching for the last 6 years. I've always been very liberty minded, right? On social media, that's how you can find me at Teaching Liberty, or Twitter, Teach Liberty 1. And so kind of like this COVID stuff rolled around, the schools didn't open back up, and that really kind of sparked me. I was like, this isn't right. So I started kind of getting out there and protesting and working with parents. And then that morphed into this whole fight with the mandates. And that's kind of where I am currently. I'm a teacher on unpaid leave, fighting the system, fighting the good fight, and also advocating for my own son who's in kindergarten this year.
So is there any indication that any of that might be changing, like as COVID seems to be winding down, as they're starting to loosen stuff with masks, especially nationwide? Um, like I'm in Indiana, where it's a pretty red state, and all school and public transportation mandates have been dropped for masks. So our kids 2 weeks ago, masks were optional in school, and then effective this week, masks are no longer required on the buses. So everything seems to be trending back in the
Right.
direction of normalcy around here. Does it
Right.
look like there's
And
any
so, and
hope of
I'll point
that
that
in?
out. Yeah, it does. We almost seem to be on the same trend, which is interesting because you're in Indiana. You're saying it's a red state. Now, is this like statewide? Is this just where you live? Because, I think of red states as like being more normal. Like I didn't realize there was like still red states. I thought this was kind of like a blue state thing. So that's an interesting that I would definitely love to get more into. But I would say, yeah, it does seem like things are kind of snapping back all of a sudden. My son yesterday got to go to school for his first day without a mask, so that was a big deal. And he woke up today and he was like, "So I can go again today without a mask?" I was like, "Yes, like yes, the masks are over, hopefully forever." Um, and uh, there was the mask mandate in my town was dropped. Connecticut, it was town by town for a while, and where I live, we had one, but I didn't really wear a mask anywhere. It was mostly the schools, and then in New York City, of course, they had the key to NYC, which was a vaccine passport system for anybody who was 5 or older. They had to have 2 doses to access essentially any public accommodations, right? So whether it was the movies or a museum or a show or their sports team, right? Kids had to quit their sports for this stuff. And that's I think it's being dropped on the 7th or effective Monday. So, you know, they're dropping those, but there's no word about the employer mandate. In New York City, I believe there's still a private employer mandate and a public city worker employer mandate. So there's been no word of those getting dropped. And so all New York City workers, whether you're private or public, are supposed to have 2 doses. And the city agencies have been very reluctant to accept medical or religious exemptions. For some other workplaces, it I think it varies from work to place to work to place. The bigger ones seem more reluctant to take them, whereas if you're at like a medium or a smaller size company, it seems easier to get those exemptions.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was disheartening how long it went here, especially considering that Indiana is a very red state. Um, and I think it may have been county by county basis on a
Okay.
lot of that.
Are you in a
Like
bluer,
our
like, area?
particular, I am not, which is what's surprising about it. I got I got kind of pissed off with the last email that they had sent out that said that they were going to continue to have the mask mandate for our schools here in the county because they had been seeing such great success. It's like, oh, or maybe it's because
Where?
our county just doesn't have a lot of right.
Right.
Like maybe
Just
it's
saying,
because the county as a whole doesn't have a whole lot of cases. Like maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the mask thing. So
yeah.
I actually sent an email to the when they sent out the last one saying we're going to extend the mask mandate for another month. Uh, I sent an email back and said, I just said, why don't you just send the next email and say this is going to continue indefinitely until we rise up and overthrow you? And a week later, they dropped all mandates.
Okay.
I don't
So
know if I
you're
had
gonna take
anything to
credit
do
for
with
that. Go
that,
ahead, take that credit, take that credit.
but then the following week, the state dropped all of it as well. So it's
Yeah. Well, there
who
was,
knows?
like,
I don't
some
know.
there was, like, a what do they call those things? A think tank or one of those research policy centers, and one of their papers got leaked that it was essentially like, "These are the talking points, like, COVID is over, like, it's been going on for so long, we're ready to move on," and then boom, the next day, everybody was like, "Oh, yep, we're looking at the metrics and the numbers and they look good." And you're like, "Wait, can you tell us like what the actual metrics and numbers are?" "Well, we look at a various number of indicators and we want to see them heading in this direction and but they will never tell you. They might give you like 4 or 5 things they're looking at, but they won't tell you what number they want to see. "Oh, we just wanna see it heading in the right direction, and, there was a point last year in June when it was, like, point 0.4 cases per 100,000, and right now we're at, like, 16 per 100,000, and, well, we just wanna see it moving in the right direction." So, like, okay, so what number? Well, and it's like, it's ridiculous. And now they basically set the precedent that they can bring these back whenever they want because there is no number. There is no off or on ramps. It's just however they feel.
That's the thing that really concerns me about. So I do a morning show and then I also do a show with Johnny Profita called Peddling Fiction. So I do way too much. and we talk about varying topics on all the different ones. But one of the things that we had talked about on, it might have actually been on this show. I lose track. Anyway, we talked about how, like in New Zealand, that the High Court in New Zealand had found that all of these actions that their prime minister had taken were illegal, and the prime minister is not going to have any repercussions for doing any of that for 2 straight years. There's not going to be any pushback. In fact, knowing how that part of the country is, it was actually Monday night with Alan Mosley on my show when we were talking about this. But anyway, like the prime minister's not going to get any pushback on that. In fact, she'll probably get reelected next time around.
That would be,
And
but
the
who
really
can you
crazy thing
blame
is,
but the
yeah, their
people?
high court. Exactly. But their high court says that she did all this stuff illegally. But the next time something rolls around where she can say emergency, that it's she needs to take emergency action, she's going to do it again. Just because the high court said that it was illegal doesn't mean that it's going to stop anything or change anything the next time around. Like that threshold has been crossed, and we never go back. And that's
You don't
that's
think
the
so?
harsh
I was
reality
gonna
where we are
say,
right now.
I was gonna ask you, like, okay, so that's the case, right? We basically have these courts and clown courts, I guess, basically, because it's like they can say something, but it's after the fact, and it's not gonna do anything to prevent it happening again in the future. So what do we do? Like, is there any way to prevent it, or is this just how it is and we have to accept it? Like, I don't know. That's a pretty big black pill. I'm not ready to accept that. Like I think that there ought to be something
Well,
that we
see,
can do.
I don't think anything we can do at a national level. I'm not entirely sure there's anything we can do at a state level, but we can do like what I had threatened in my email: overrun the school board, overrun our county offices, get
And when you say overrun, you
get
mean
with people who
elect
are
people into
like-minded.
the seats.
If able.
Okay. I'm just
Yes,
trying to
that would be.
clarify what process we're talking about overrunning, like
That would be preferable, but I'm not opposed to just overrunning it, generally
like a
speaking.
coup, like a coup.
I know enough people who are, yeah, like a full-on
Okay.
hostile takeover is also, except that's necessary. Um,
Okay.
I don't
See,
think,
this is my question.
especially like where I live, I don't think that would be necessary.
Okay. So what makes a hostile takeover
But
different from like tyranny? Like what makes it, what's that line when we can say we're going the democratic process isn't working, this is the will of the people, yet we're going to have to take the seeming most tyrannical action in order to enact the will of the people. I guess that's kind of the conundrum that the French Revolution got into and got themselves all caught up in.
see, I think you can't think too hard about it. Okay, so I
I'm
live
thinking too hard about it.
here at this house. We are a few miles down the road from the University of Southern Indiana,
Okay.
and USI is a D2 school currently, and they had a vote amongst not it's not a democratic process per se, but they had a survey for the faculty, staff, and student body of USI, saying, "Hey, we have the opportunity to D1. Would y'all be interested in moving from a Division II school to a D1 school?" And overwhelmingly, the student body, faculty, and staff said, "No, we don't want to do that. Keep it the way it is." And the school said, "Cool, we're going to be a D1 school now." At that point, if you have elected into position, and those people know why they were elected, and they choose to actively not do what they had said they were going to do, then I stopped considering them to be exercising the purpose radically elected. At that point, they have uh, they have thrown out the trust of their electorate body and they removed. That's
Okay.
where I
They
kind of
need to
draw
be
lines.
okay.
Like,
So
am I right or wrong on that? I don't know. Like, a lot of libertarians
right.
might not think that that's the right approach, but at some point, you have to hold people accountable. And if they're not
Mm,
being held accountable or living up to what they were elected, it's time to remove them. And if it's if you're right now we're still 2 years away from the next gubernatorial election here in Indiana. If the governor needs to be removed early, then he needs to be removed early.
mm. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, I do think in the sense, I wrote a tweet to this effect the other day saying like I'm tired of the previous generations telling me that we have to constantly give up our rights in exchange for basically this veneer of security and wealth. And I'm tired of being called a radical because I don't want to accept like these infringements upon my liberties. But in order to do that, like you have to put your foot down and say no. You have to put your foot down and say and stand up. You have to be willing to give something up, right? And so many and I just feel like the boomers in particular have really bought into this idea of like, well, we have wealth and security and I'm good and I have my pension and like, I just have certain things I have to do and this is the way it is and pushing those papers. I'm tired of that. I think that we've gone too far. We're just willing to give up too much of our basic fundamental freedoms in exchange. It is a veneer. It's not even real. They control everything from what you put in your mouth to, the air that you breathe outside. It's too much. And so I do think that there is a point when you have to stand up and take it back for sure. Um it's just I guess, like, at the point when you start doing these things, like, okay, well, you don't wanna set a precedent that anytime you don't like something that somebody does, you're just gonna, like, go and kick them out of office, you know what I mean? Like, it has to be substantial. I've been reading the Declaration of Independence a lot, to try to figure out exactly what that line is. But it's you can only get so specific.
Yeah, I have read the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights, uh, a number of times, and it's it is hard to pinpoint what that point would be. I think probably point. It, so some consideration should have been going into that a little more thorough prior to COVID anyway. And
Mm,
if the actions of our both federal and state governments over the past 2 years haven't kind of pushed people in the direction of saying, hey, those founding guys, they were kind of onto something, and they were seeing a lot of shit that we are seeing now. Only we're seeing it even worse. I don't know. I don't know how to wake people up to that at this point, but
yeah.
like
Oh, for
I
sure. I
believe we're
do
there.
agree.
Uh,
Yeah. I do. I think we're there. I guess I'm willing to at least try to, use the democratic process a little bit longer, right? Like like really take a serious effort to like run our people. I don't think that there's been that in our generation where regular people have really been woken up to the extent that they are and being like, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat in and I'm going to run. And so I guess like I'm trying to be really optimistic about this election coming around. Like you guys don't have a gubernatorial race, but out here in Connecticut we do. I had opportunity 2 nights ago to meet with one of the top contenders of the Republican Party for governor. And so for me, that just makes me like, all right, like, boom, we have a meeting with the guy who could be the next governor. Like, we're going to work our ground game. We had 30 people in a room, like, all right. And we know 30 more people wanted to be there, but we had limited space. So it just gives me a lot of hope that this time around we can maybe take some of these seats back and correct some of these really short-term things that have gone in, especially in terms of election integrity. There's a lot of that stuff that makes me worried, but I don't want to be called in whatever, for that. But like these things are real. Like it's happening even at the local level. We our when I went to bed, our one candidate was ahead, and then overnight, boom, the other one pulled ahead because of those mail-in ballots. And like maybe like they really are winning the mail-in ballot game, but it's like I don't know how much of that game we should be even playing in the first place. You know? So those are, but I think
Oh, we
like I
could
said,
go
I'm
in.
optimistic about this time around. For we saw here in Greenwich, which is the town over, Greenwich, Connecticut. Everybody knows Greenwich, Connecticut. I feel like, it's like that suburb outside of New York City. Um, but they took back like their whole school board. They flipped a bunch of seats in a bunch of local elections. They elected Kim Fiorello, they elected Nick Fazio, like these young Republicans who are not squishy. And it's because they were empowered to get out there and actually vote people in a way that we really haven't seen. Like, I guess you can say, like, for Obama, or like to vote out Trump, people were like, I saw a lot of people come out, but I don't think that those big national elections matter as much as the local ones.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. The local elections is the thing that's going to be how you make a change in your own life, like flipping your school board, flipping your city council, what have you, finding those squishy candidates or the ones that are just terrible on everything, and then find somebody to run against them, and then have a good ground game. Get out and find people that,
Right.
because a lot of times in these like local elections, a lot of people don't even realize that these elections are happening or who's running or like what's going on. So just getting out and having a good ground game and really being active in the community and being like, hey, look, this is what this person has been voting for. It's terrible. This is what this person thinks. It's really good. We should get rid of the terrible person. We need you to come vote. And
Right.
like, does it take more work? Sure. But that's where you're actually going to have impact and make
Right.
change in your life is by changing it right there in the county, in the city, in your township,
Right.
whatever.
And I think we need to readjust like our expectations of what life is supposed to be. What does the American dream mean? Does it really mean that you work 9 to 5, you come home and like you have dinner with the family and then sit on the couch and drink a bunch of beers and watch Netflix? Like, is that really the American dream, Um, or is it actually being, that rugged, a little bit more of that rugged individualist, right? And I think that people see that as very um opposite of community, but I actually see them as integral pieces, right? Like, you can't be a super strong rugged individualist unless you come from a really strong community and a strong network, right? And you can't have a really strong community unless you have a bunch of people who are willing to get out there and actually invest in that community and be leaders of that community. So I really see them as like that necessary tension versus like this like collectivist versus individualist that they get broken up to, like capitalism versus socialism. And like I see that tension to me is the American dream.
So like for us, we're moving much more rural. Even we're fairly rural at this house, but we're
I mean,
moving
you're in
even more rural.
Indiana.
And yeah, yeah, it's not like and I'm not around Indy or anything like that. Like, so we're getting out in the country and we're gonna have a massive garden. We've got goats, we've got chickens. We'll probably expand and pick up a couple hogs and start breeding hogs. Like, I'm trying to be self sufficient and get off the grid. I am most definitely that rugged individualist type. I like to hunt and all that kind of stuff. Like, we're trying to disconnect, but at the same time,
Mm,
our community and the county that we're moving to is also, generally speaking, very, very rural and a lot of those rugged individualist types. And it's a place that by getting active in county politics, you can kind of shape things on a level that you never see a repeat of 2020 because you
mm.
have the right people, especially in small rural counties like that. Like, yeah, I've been saying it for a while, but like people should be getting out of cities. I don't. I know for some people, like that's their preference is city life.
Yeah.
maybe it's because I was raised on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. Like where our nearest neighbor was my grandmother, whose house was a half a mile away across all the fields. Like, maybe it's because I was raised like that I just have no interest in city life. But I don't know how people can look at the last 2 years and think that living in an urban jungle is preferable, especially when you've seen the way that they have treated individuals. Like they have reduced your humanity in these big cities. That's a crime to me. Like that should be punishable.
No, I agree. And I mean, part of it just comes the fact that you're living on top of each other like that, right? But part of it comes to the fact that those governments there have way more power and authority. And like when you're in a city, even where I live, right? It's like a suburb, but Stanford is like a small city where I live. It's like the next you can take an express train from here to New York City. So it's like the next major stop. Um, but we're much, much smaller, like, 150,000 people or something. And then, there's a bunch of little towns around us. And even from Stanford to those towns, like we have way more like regulations and way more different things that the city gets its hands in versus these little, towns outside of us that have, 6,000 people, 10,000 people, 50,000 people, much smaller. So I can see it here. Yeah, I mean, and then sometimes I do like I would love to go live out in the middle of nowhere sometimes, but then I'm like, I don't know if I could be that far away from everything." Like I'm always shocked even when I go out to like I went to Memphis. Like I have a cousin that lives out in Memphis and it's like, I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to a city." I was thinking, "But you can't walk anywhere. Like you have to take a car everywhere." Versus like even where I live, you could kind of walk some places like in my town you know, but it's just different. So, but I definitely don't wanna live in the city. Like, when I was younger, I lived in the city for a little bit, but I never envisioned myself, like, living in the city with a family or anything like that. No way.
It's funny you talk about like the smaller towns having like 6 or 10,000 people. The
Yeah.
the town that I grew up in, the town I grew up in had about 2,200. Like I am very small town, uh,
Yeah,
rural
it's
rural kid.
different. It's just so different, like, when you get off the coast and go, like, inland, like, it's just way different, how things are spaced out and, what big or small means, because, like, N New York City, it has less people now because they fled during the pandemic because it's not a desirable place to live, but, it had 8,000,000 people, and so if you compare, like, 150,000 to 8,000,000, it's like nothing, you know? But then, of course, when you compare that to 2,200, that's, like, really nothing.
Yeah.
So you can s
So
and I guess
speaking
if you
of,
have yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I was going to kind of pivot to the educational side of stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
Um, okay, so because I did grow up very rurally, I had a much different experience with school than a lot of people that I talk to online. Um, our football coach the was the English teacher, and like I also late '90s, early 2000s. The state of Kentucky was still in the process of switching over to this what is now known as CARA system. It was Curus at one time. They've had all these different cats. They've had all these different names
Yeah.
for it. But it's the standardized system that Kentucky is using now educationally. And a lot of it is very similar to a lot of the standardized systems that the Department of Education has rolled out, kind of nationwide for a large part. I guess when I was in school, we were kind of on the tail end of normalcy. It's at the front end of that stuff really starting to
Right.
get implemented.
Yeah,
So
I think
nobody
we're about the
cared,
same.
and none of our teachers cared. They didn't try to enforce it a whole lot. And then most of them retired not long after I graduated, and because they didn't want to do it. But then at the same time, I have a lot of friends that I graduated with who are now teachers in the system. My mom was a preschool teacher up until I could deal with the system and all of these changes over the years. And I wanted to talk about like some of those changes and how you've seen as a teacher, both coming up through the collegiate system and getting your degree, and then also in practice, like in schools and stuff. Uh, I was I was going to be a teacher, and I took two education classes, and I dropped out of both of them about 3 weeks in, and decided I was done with it. Like I wasn't going to do it.
Why?
It
What
was
was
not for
it?
me. I
What was it?
One of them was a methods and something else, and then the other one I can't remember the other one was Kentucky specific for some of the like the
Yeah.
guidelines and the
So
practices
what
in
was
this.
it that, like, you were like, "Nah, I'm good."
Uh, I didn't feel like what they wanted me to do as a teacher would actually benefit students in the learning process.
Okay. Yes,
Granted,
yeah, yeah, I can totally see that, I can totally see that because I felt like that so much in so many of my classes, and I guess just my thought was just sort of like, "Alright, I'm gonna do whatever they tell me to do to get there, but, like, when I get there, I'm gonna do it different," you know? Or I'm gonna, like, play the game enough where I can do my own thing, and I justified that for a long time, right? Like, I justified basically, like, turning my head and, like, accepting a lot of the BS from the system because I was like, "I can carve out my own little space here. I can, slowly, incrementally change things, work my way up, maybe, have my own school one day, become a principal or something, and, like, have my own space where I can create something within the system, you know, having to deal with some BS, but also hopefully being able to change some of it." Um, and basically, really, I saw that unravel over the last 2 years because I was thinking to myself, like, how could I be a principal in the city and have them tell me, no, you're not allowed to open your school? Like, I would just see myself down there, like, opening my school and being like, kids come in. And like, like I really think I would have done that if I was a principal. Like, I mean, I was out there as a teacher, I was out on the street protesting, like, for these schools to open. I was online ranting and putting myself out there and getting, you know, so much pushback and canceled in all different types of ways. But yeah, like definitely from when I believe we're about the same. Like I'm 90, I'm 90s into the 2000s is when I was going through the school system. And I definitely felt it change, like, from even when I was a kid, they started with some of these, like, programs where it's like, "Everybody's learning together," and, like, "We're all have our own," and, like, "Well, so and so is more capable than this person, so, like, that's why we're gonna grade, her harder and them easier." Like, some of this, like, equity kinda stuff, but it wasn't called equity yet. It was more just, like, kind of, like, piloting these really squishy, like, ideas that sound nice, right? Like, yeah, we want everybody to have an opportunity and like everybody learns differently and like those things are true for sure, but like that doesn't then lead to like trying to equalize everybody, right? That's not the way to go. And I think also there was a big technology change. Like when I was in high school, we sat there and we took notes off of overhead projectors. You know what I mean? And then by the time that I started teaching, we now have laptops and computers and screens and touch boards. And so like there was a big shift in technology. But also when I was in high school, like teachers would just be like security. And they would just have security come get kids who that they, that were causing problems. But like by the time I'm a teacher, like you can't do that anymore, right? Like when I was a kid, we didn't have ICT classes. We didn't, like special ed was like if you're in special ed, like you're in a special class, you're, away and everybody else is just together and like they have some leveled classes, but like we're not doing this like ICT thing and some kids get special tutors and like all this stuff. And like, maybe some of it's good and some of it's bad, but I think we're kind of going too far with these ideas to the point where it's like they're well intentioned, but guess what? Kids are doing worse and worse and worse every single year. So,
Have you
um,
seen some of the stuff that talks about like the statistics? One of them that I was looking at specifically was in like Atlanta school systems,
mhm.
where the vast majority of the students who are graduating can't read.
Yeah, I
They-
think on
They're
average,
graduating high school and they
yeah,
can't read. Like period. They're illiterate, but
yeah.
they're pushing them through and graduating them. So they have like these insane
Oh, I've seen it.
graduation
I've seen
rates, and they're touting how great the schools are doing because they have these great graduation rates, but none of the kids like who are graduating are employable. They're not getting anything out of it. They're
Right.
just getting pushed through a system. I mean, I have been very pissed off about this for a number of years. My son should have been held back in sixth grade. He should have been
Mhm.
held back last year, and he should be held back this year. But his mom and the school system keep pushing him forward, even though he shouldn't be pushed forward. Like, why are they so scared? Why is public education, especially, so
Yeah.
scared to just let kids fail? Like, failure is
Mm,
a good thing. Failure is
mhm.
something that you learn from. You don't get anything by just moving on.
I mean, I think some of it's well-intentioned, right? Like, you don't want your kid to get hurt, you know? But we've gone too far with it. I mean, things were far more dangerous when we were kids, just in terms of like statistics when you talk about crime and kidnapping and even just like the rates of people like getting hurt and injured and stuff. And now it's way safer, and yet you're not allowed to do those things. Like, you can't leave your kid in the my mom used to leave us in the car all the time when she went to the store, you know what I mean? Like, or, we were not allowed to come inside. Like, if it was a nice day, no, you're outside, you know? Like, I don't care, come back when it gets dark. And just, like, things like that. It's, like, weird. It's not accepted. Like, I let my son run around, you know, like, at the park, and I'll, like, go take a lap, and, like, people are like, "Whoa, like, you do that?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, I've been coming to this park since I was a baby." Like, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like so, it's
Like,
just
I gave him a knife. He'll be fine.
no, no. Definitely not, but, you know, like, I just
Hmm.
feel it's like, you know, like, he can go for a lap around the circle at the park by himself, like, I think he's gonna be fine, right? That's probably good for him to, like, gain a little independence in a, like, reasonably isolated area where there's one way in and one way out, so
Yeah, especially something like that. Like here for us, I just kick the kids out and lock the doors and go roam the neighborhood. I don't care what you do. Don't come back unless somebody's dying. Like take a couple hours and go be kids. Like
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like, and I have friends who, if I say that I did that, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you just let your kids?" I'm like, I didn't just let them. I made them. We're,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm,
So I'm saying it used to be definitely so different, like, just hanging out with the kids in the neighborhood. I mean, we had some video games and stuff. Like, I definitely played some video games, but it was nothing like this. It was like I played like NHL 3D hockey 1998. That was my jam. I
Mhm.
beat it a bunch of times. And what was the other one? On PlayStation 3, I used to like Tony Hawk, those Tony Hawk games. I was nice at those.
So kind of going back to how things used to be a little bit,
Mhm.
um, and then versus like kind of how things are.
Yeah.
Something that has kind of upset me with the way my kids' schooling is done. Like my daughter is incredibly smart. She has to keep doing the same stuff that all of the other kids are doing, even though it's really below her.
Mhm.
Um, that's frustrating for me because like I was in a similar position when I was her age and in school, and my teachers just kind of let me do my thing. I was allowed to kind of roam through the textbook and figure stuff out on my own. Uh, they have they have such, I
They don't
don't
have
know if I want to call
textbooks.
it, well, I don't know if I want to call it like a rigid guideline for how they have to do things, but it seems that way. Like
Yeah.
there's a very specific method structure to it, and there's no opportunity for figuring stuff out on your own.
To
Is the way
just
it kind of seems,
explore, yeah.
especially you see it in, and it's been something that's been criticized a whole lot over the last several years. But like the Common Core math stuff,
Yeah.
I, my kids would look at that and they hated doing math because it didn't make sense to them. And then if I taught them, or if I just shot to do it, they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, I get that." But then they would
Right.
start working, and they would get failing grades because they weren't doing it the Common Core way. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, like I understand that, and I understand that Common Core is not math. Common Core is a methodology for how you go about finding answers to stuff.
And I
If
think
there are
it's
other ways that kids can
interesting.
find answers,
Right, right. I think it's interesting, like I think that too, like sometimes if somebody really is struggling and you kind of like um show them, like one of the things that I was having a hard time understanding is like, all right, like how can you have um it was something with fractions and decimals and how if you like flip them and multiply them they're equal. I'm like, okay, like it works, but like then I saw how it like drew out and I'm like, oh, I get it. Right? But I think in Common Core they have you like do all this kind of like drawing stuff and then they like want that to like elucidate the concept to you versus just being like, okay, this is how it is and this is how it works. You learn how to do it and then you like be like, okay, this is why it works. I actually like Khan Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with Khan Academy. I think I like the way that they do it. I think it's a really good mix of like the traditional, like just like you need to memorize some certain things, here's some formulas, and then here's like a picture of why it works. So,
yeah, I do like Khan Academy. They do use the graphical examples, and you get to see you get to see the examples and the kind of the block structure that a lot of the Common Core stuff
mhm,
uses, but they do it in a reasonable and a sensible way that
right,
like that shouldn't be applied you know flat line across the board for everything. Like there are problems that you can solve
right.
different ways, easier ways. It should be adaptable to the different learning styles.
Yeah.
Like we talked about earlier. Like kids learn different ways. Like for me, if you tell me something, if I hear you say it,
Mhm,
as soon as you walk away, I forgot what you said. But if
right.
you write it down and I read it,
Yeah.
I'll remember it forever.
So I'm
So
gonna
that's
tell
like,
you that like that's actually so like this whole idea of like learning styles is actually a little bit bunk, right? Most people actually learn better from like visualizing things and like writing them down. But there just happen to be some people who are really good at like auditorily remembering things or like they're kind of like just outliers. Or like you might have a preference, like you might think that you like to like write things down better, but actually like getting a visual of something, like I mean not all things you can visual, right? But just like using your visual imagery is actually the strongest way for anybody to remember things and learn things. You have to have like multiple ways of encoding them. But like I think it's more about like different kids just enjoy different things, right? And like there are kids who are like better at some things than other things. So I think there needs to be like a medium between that, between like the idea of like learning styles. Because if you look at the research, it's all bunk, right? But that's different than I think how we use it in common parlance. So just a little.
and that is interesting that you talked about that because I've noticed that with my kids or like my stepson is 18 and he learned, I can't remember what it was. He just watched a bunch of YouTube videos and learned how to do
Mm,
something. And I can't do that. If you give me if you give me an instruction manual and I read through the manual, then I know how to do it. But I can't
okay.
sit and watch a bunch of YouTube videos. I get bored. I just can't.
Okay.
I
But
don't
it's
want to
almost the
watch
same
crap.
thing, I feel like. It's almost
Right.
like the same thing. It's just like it's a different medium, but it's actually the same way of learning something, I would say. Yeah, so it's just about what you enjoy, what you prefer. Yeah, I can see that. See, I'll like sit there when I'm like trying to do something with my car, I'll like sit there with the video and like play it over and over again. I'm just like, okay, what they do at that point? Like, where's that? Like, I don't know. Sometimes reading the manuals is like really overwhelming. You like undo them. Like,
Let's see. I guess I grew up building a lot of stuff with Legos, so I like to lay it out and read it
okay.
and look at it.
Nice. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. I have my son do the
Uh,
Legos. I love the Legos because you don't need to read to be able to do it. And it's just like he can sit there and he can like build something by looking at the instructions like on his own. And I love it.
and see, like my kids, I've tried to get my kids into Legos, and they don't do well with that. Like if they watch a video of somebody doing it, then they pick it up that way. But if they're just
Okay.
looking at it and trying to read the instructions for it, then it doesn't click as well. So yeah, I mean, talking about the different learning styles and stuff. And especially when we talk about like how much the schools try to cater to people and create this like equity system where everybody's learning the same thing to, but they're, kind of trying to tailor it to the fact that everybody has different needs. But then when it comes to teaching something like, like Common Core, like all this other stuff, uh, there's no
Nope, this is how
flexibility
you
in
have
it.
to learn it.
It's
Yep.
Yeah, it's
It doesn't
so
make any sense.
counterintuitive.
Exactly, yeah, a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. I think a lot of it is just also the root of it is where we're getting trained, is the colleges, right? Is the where the research is being done. So if you have these professors who come up with an idea and the research standards really aren't high at all if you're looking at a lot of this stuff, and they get it published and then they want to make money off of it, so they build books and they write programs and they build curriculum, and it really is just like a whole money making system. And now there definitely have been different, like, I would say political or whatever type of movements that have also injected into them. So whether that be like the critical race theory stuff, which I don't really like saying that term, but it definitely like has been kind of injected in up in the, I'm talking at the college level, right? So because CRT is like a college level thing. So we're talking at the college level, it's being injected into how people are being taught and the research that's being done, which if you look at what Kimberly Crenshaw says, like that's what it's meant to do, right? So it's being injected at this upper level on that end. And then you also have like these big money people, right? You have the Rothschilds, and you have the Rockefellers, and you have there's a couple other big ones in there. And for a long time they've used the education and research center to like just like push their nonsense, like pretty openly. If you look at their white papers and if you read any of their history, like a lot of this very like a lot of the medication, the over medicalization stuff, that comes from like that German tradition, really.
Well, and like you can see it with especially like the pushback against Joe Rogan. Like, did you see
Mm.
how many of those experts and everything that were calling for Joe Rogan to be removed from Spotify? How many of them were PhD students or
Right.
master's
Well, it
students?
becomes
Like,
a gatekeeping thing. It's a gatekeeping thing, right? But if you're really like an academic, yeah, credentials matter, but only to the extent that they actually mean anything, right? Like if you have these credentials, but your work isn't then what are you talking about? If you don't have those credentials and you're doing good work, then like cool, you know? Like it's just the over credentialization and then the gatekeeping, like, oh, you don't have a doctor before your name, so you couldn't possibly have anything important to say.
that's my brother-in-law is he got his he got his master's in library studies or whatever. Like he wants to be a professional librarian,
Okay, okay, no,
which
listen, I'm a historian, so, like, I'm kinda nerdy like that, so I laugh, but also, like, "Hey."
but it's like, cool, more power to you. But you can't be a librarian anywhere unless you have a master's or a
Mm,
doctorate. And none of those jobs pay good. Like
mm.
you have to have a master's to get a job that pays like 25, 30 grand a year. Like I could go work at Lowe's or Walmart and make
Make
more than
more than
that
that.
without a master's. Why?
Right,
Like it's just crazy. The gatekeeping on some of that stuff is insane.
and then it just becomes,
And
like,
I
a
mean
lot.
that's the U.S. educational community as a whole. Like
Mm,
that's if you don't have your master's, if you don't have your doctorate, if you don't have these certificates and these degrees and all this stuff, is you're a lesser. It's like you're a lesser person. Like my mom was a phenomenal teacher's aide for many years, and I would argue was a better teacher than a lot of the other teachers in her school. But she had to go back and get her degree and get her master's and do all of this stuff just to come back and do what she had been doing to begin with
exactly,
anyway. It's
right. It's like, again, I'm not arguing, like, I do think that there does need to be some type of credential system or accreditation system, but it needs to be, it can't be so inflexible that I guess it comes back to the people, right? It comes back to what are we, the people, willing to accept, and how much of our freedom to be able to choose to enter into like a contract with somebody, right? Consent with another human being to do something without those credentials. I guess then on top of it, you get the insurance thing, right? Well, if you don't have the credentials, then it's harder to get insurance for that person and they're a bigger liability. And like, so we just have like all this crap built on top of each other, the over institutionalization that really just takes the power away more and more from us. So I think, yeah, we have to create our own systems, right? It's like destruction and birth. Like as these systems become irrelevant and overburdened with all this crap, we're just like over here building, building, building. And then once those fall, boop, then we get to take over. That's my non-violent, peaceful transition of power.
See, that is something that I want to see more of. I want to see more like community schools instead of state-run public education centers. I want to see more people.
Mm,
Uh, we have a really good one here. It's like a school group, and they meet at Baptist, and they're all homeschooling, but they're also all kind of learning together, and it's almost like a school in and of itself, except that they're not a school, and it's like I want to see stuff like that. Like I want to see the unschooling of
yeah,
kids. I think I've about halfway got at least the girls convinced that homeschooling is the way to go. I've convinced getting my ex on board with letting me like homeschool my kids is where the rub is. But like getting kids out of public education and teaching them things that are practical and applicable, and letting them learn things that they want to learn. Like some of the
yeah,
I talked to Alex Hatch a few months ago, and her kids do the unschool thing, where they don't have a curriculum. They just kind of figure it out as they go, and if they want to learn how to read, then they learn how to read, and if they don't, then they don't. But most kids at some point
right.
are going to want to learn how
Yeah.
they're going to want to learn how to do this
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't know if I'm
Uh,
that liberal about it. I do I like I so I see myself as more like a hybrid. Like I like the classical like approach. Like I do think like okay, like you need to sit down and like you need to learn to read. Like you need to sit down and we're going to learn to write. Like we're going to learn cursive. Like I believe in that. Like it doesn't need to be like in this really super compliance based like um punitive style, although I do believe in punitive punishment too. Like, it's like I'm just like super hybrid in my approach. I'm not going to sit there and make reading an undesirable activity where we're fighting about it, but like we need to sit down and we need to read for 15 minutes a day. And that's just non-negotiable. Like it's going to happen. So and then yeah, I like the classical curriculum, but at the same time, you only need to do so much of that a day. You don't need to be there for 6 hours studying all day. You do, depending on the age, 30 minutes, an hour, building up as they get older. You should probably be doing a few hours, but then you should be getting outside, right? You should be doing a project. You should be doing something hands-on where, maybe you are intentionally trying to take some of that rote learning, classical learning you're doing and apply it, but maybe you're just doing something else that's, out gardening or out going for a walk or a hike or doing some community service project or building something. I don't know.
that
Can
was the
people
thing
do
that I
more?
remember most of my like elementary school and even like junior high and high school was not the time that we spent sitting in classes, but the time that we had outside at recess, or what we like in junior high and high school we had flex time where you got to go hang out in the gym or go sit outside or like whatever. And, like yes, the schooling side of things was important and we spent a lot of time in the classroom, but we also spent a lot of time just not doing those things, just like playing and having fun and interacting with each other and being kids. That's something that really pisses me off about the school that my kids are in. Is it is so rigid and it is so inflexible, and they don't seem like they have the time to just go play and be kids. They get like 15 minutes after they get out of lunch where they have recess. Like uh, we had 15 minutes at like 9 o'clock in the morning after our first class to go outside and play. And then we had another 30 minutes later on. And then at the end of
Yeah.
the day, we had like a whole hour at the very end of the day to just like go out and run around and blow off steam and be kids. Like they get 15, 20 minutes after lunch. Like that's not sufficient. You can't keep kids cooped up like that for 6, 7 hours a day and expect them to get anything out of it. And then they come home and they have hours worth of homework that they have to do and all of this like it's insane. I feel like we're making learning not fun for kids. And if it's not fun, if it's not something that's
Yeah.
enjoyable, they're not going to want to do it. I
Sure.
don't want to do it
Yeah,
if
I
it's
mean,
not
I
fun.
don't think everything needs to be fun too. Again, like I'm like super hybrid. Like sometimes I'm like, all right, like you got to sit down and do this, you know? But it shouldn't be all day. Like it shouldn't be every single thing as a fight, right? It shouldn't they shouldn't dread everything about it, but sometimes you don't like to do things. Like my son, he's like learning to read. He's like at the point where I'm reading, he's like doing like those phonics books where it's like Sam sits, like Sam has a dog, or whatever. Matt has a hat, like these basic kind of things, like where he's starting to blend his sounds together and reading them. And it's not, like, super easy for him, like, he knows all his sounds and he can say them, but it's not easy, like, it's a laborious task for him, so it's not something he enjoys doing, like, versus, like, I can get him to do things like math or, like, coloring or, like, other kind of, like, academic-y things, like, much more easily. But it's like, "No, like, we need to read every day." So that's definitely something that it's like, but at the same time, I'm not gonna, like, yell and scream at him to the point where it's, like, traumatic, like, uh
Right. And I guess that's kind of what I meant by fun. Not as
Yeah.
much fun from a like yay type perspective
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
something that's yeah, it's not
Right,
something that they're dreading.
right.
It may not it may be challenging and difficult,
Mhm,
but it's at least rewarding and like
right,
they want to do it even if it's hard.
right.
Like
And there's something
they're
about
still getting something
respect,
out of it.
right? There's something about the respect aspect that I think is so important. Like, the people who I often respect the most are kinda like the ones who are like they have their standards, right? Like, and they can be tough about it and they could be mean or like, sometimes a lot of people didn't like them because they saw them in that way. But for me, I always respected those people kind of the most. And I feel like in order to like really learn something and appreciate something and also have fun at something, like you need to respect. You need to have that element of respect, which I think that we're missing in society in general, right? I mean, every generation always says, "Oh, these kids are less respectful than the last," but I think that there's definitely a level of respect that kids have lost for just like adults in general, like when they get in school, because they don't respect somebody who just like lets them like hand in things whenever, or just like, oh, like you'll get it next time, like no, hold some standards here. Like,
I don't know how many assignments my son has that are overdue, and it's like, and he can just turn them in whenever. Like, no, you should just that should just be a fail. You should get an F on that, and you should be held back for the last 2 years. Like, let kids fail. Teach them that there are consequences for failure, and there are also lessons to be learned from failure. I mean,
mm,
that's you know, failure is a great teacher, and I think the modern education system kind of tries to prevent kids from having to go
right.
through failure, and I think that's a huge disservice to development of children. You get this like whatever you want to call 18 to 24-year-old class that we have that feel like they need to be given everything. Like
Mm,
not being given everything is some sort of an assault on their freedom or some shit. Yeah,
yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And but I do think again, like I see it happening. I see parents, getting out to the school board meetings, running for school boards, people starting their own schools. That's something that I'm looking into doing here is like creating a co-op and, figuring out how we can kind of really take control back of our kids' education systems. So, yeah, I try to look at a lot of these things that we could be really negative about and see the opportunity in here to take our liberties back, take our communities back, and hopefully take this country back.
absolutely. Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for joining me. Give all your plugs and everything, and we'll call it a wrap.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Justin. So again, Stephanie Edmonds, you can find me on Twitter at Teach Liberty One. I'm over on Instagram at Teaching Liberty. You could catch me on YouTube at Teaching Liberty. And if you want to support me, check out, kind of the community that I'm trying to build, teachingliberty.org. So we got a lot of stuff going on over there. You can check out the merch, and I got exclusive, like, members only content. So it's teachingliberty.org.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much for joining me again. This was a lot of fun. I always like talking about educational stuff, especially with having a lot of friends and my mom coming, from being teachers and stuff. I
Yeah.
usually rub people the wrong way with a lot of my opinions. Like, I want to see
Well, then
teachers
you're my
be
kind of guy,
successful and have the opportunities to learn stuff,
Yeah.
or to
And
teach
good luck with
stuff.
your new
And
house. I wanna see, like, what you got going on the farm over there. That'll be cool.
oh yeah, once we get everything settled, there'll be plenty of pictures, I'm sure.
Awesome. Alright, Justin, have a good one.
Thanks. You too.